Bibles, if you would please, to Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10, we are going to be looking at verses 1 through 15 this morning. Matthew chapter 10, verses 1 through 15. And he called to him 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal every disease and every affliction. The names of the 12 apostles are these. First, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew his brother, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, Simon the zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. These 12 Jesus sent out, instructing them, "Go nowhere among the Gentiles, and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And proclaim as you go, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse lepers, cast out demons. You received without paying, give up without pay. Acquire no gold or silver or copper for your belts, no bag for your journey, or 2 tunics or sandals or a staff, for the laborer deserves his food. In whatever town or village you enter, find out who is worthy in it and stay there until you depart. As you enter the house, greet it. And if the house is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. And if anyone will not receive you or listen to your words, shake off the dust from your feet when you leave that house or town. Truly I say to you, it will be more bearable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah than for that town." Last week we saw Jesus asking his followers to pray to the Lord of the harvest that he would send forth laborers, that he would send forth workers into his harvest field. Here Jesus is saying to the disciples, you are the answer to that prayer. And so I'm about to send you out. I'm sending you to the harvest of the lost sheep of Israel. He sends them out. He gave them authority. He gave them instructions. And then he said, go. One of the greatest lessons I think that we learn from the Gospels is that we are called to live as those who are sent. To be a follower of Jesus means that we live as if we are sent. In fact, it's such a pivotal part of the Christian calling that it forms the focus of the church's mission. Jesus said, as you go, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them, teaching them. As you go, you are sent to make disciples. It's so important that we chose to include those words in our own church's mission statement, that we are sending transformed people to make Jesus known across the street and around the world. It's why I end every worship service with a very simple statement. You are sent. When we leave this place, you are sent. So we get to this chapter, and this chapters 8, 9, and 10 that we are looking at right now as Jesus is taking the kingdom. He began his ministry saying the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Then he taught the principles of the kingdom in chapters 5, 6, and 7. Then we get to chapter 8, and Jesus is taking the kingdom into everyday life. So we get to chapter 10. Where Jesus has been going from town to town, and as he went from place to place, he would do something or say something that made people have to make a decision about who he was. And then he would teach a little bit about what it meant to follow him. So now we get to chapter 10, and Jesus calls together these 12. One of the things that you may have noticed as we read through the chapter, that some of the instructions that Jesus gave to them sound a little strange to us. I mean, if the Great Commission says to, as you go, make disciples of all what? Nations. Why would Jesus say to his disciples as he was sending them out, I don't want you to go to the nations. I want you to go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. We'll talk about that as we make our way through the passage. So some of these instructions don't apply to us. But even though they don't, there are some universal principles that do apply. And so that's what I want us to focus on this morning, the universal principles of living sent. You ready? First principle is this. It is the principle of readiness. The principle of readiness. You may not have thought about it as we were making our way through chapters 8 and 9 and even the chapters prior to that, but up to this point, Jesus has done all of the preaching. Jesus has done all of the teaching. Jesus has done all of the healing, all of the casting out demons. He's done it all. He called his disciples out of the harvest. They spent time with him. They watched him. And now he says to them, hey, all of those things that you've seen me doing over the last several weeks, it's your turn. Everything that you've watched me do, that's what he says. He says, I want you to go proclaiming the kingdom of heaven is at hand. That's exactly what Jesus had been teaching. I want you to go and perform all of the miracles that you have seen me performing. He says, now it's your turn. Go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. You see, everything they had done up until this point was preparation to get them ready for this moment. Andrew and John had asked Jesus where he was staying. Jesus responded, come and see. Come and see for yourself. And they did. We're not told how all of the 12 were called to be with Jesus, but at some point, every one of them responded to some invitation that Jesus gave into their life, whether it was to come and see, to come and be with me, to come follow me. In Mark's Gospel, chapter 3, verse 14, he clearly states that Jesus appointed 12 that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach. The principle of readiness teaches us what it means to follow Jesus. And I think it's so neat. Jesus gathered people to himself so that they might grow in a relationship with him. That's why he called them disciples. A disciple was someone in that day who learned under the instruction of a master teacher. They came and spent considerable amounts of time with that master teacher. And that's what these guys had done. So he begins by saying he called to him his 12 disciples. They had answered the invitation to come and be with him, to learn from him, to be his disciple. And now Jesus says to them, I'm giving you the authority. That is to say, I am commissioning you to be sent as apostles. So he calls them as disciples. That's come gather around, be with me, learn from me, grow in your relationship to me, and now I am sending you out as an apostle. That's what the word means, one who is sent on the authority of someone else. An ambassador, if you will. And so there's a pattern that we see that emerges as Jesus is making disciples. People gather to him, they grow from that relationship, and then they go as they are sent. Sound familiar? Gather, grow, go. That's what a disciple is. A disciple is someone who gathers with God and with other believers. A disciple is someone who grows in relationship to Jesus and to other believers. And a disciple is someone who goes to make Jesus known across the street and around the world. The principle of readiness reminds us that what happens in this room, what happens in the other rooms of this building, what happens inside the walls of the facility at 700 Huffman Road is only a part of the discipleship process. It is the preparation stage to get us ready for the rest of the discipleship process. We gather and we grow in here, but unless we go, we have missed the opportunity to become fully devoted followers of Jesus. That's the principle of readiness. Then you have the principle of reliance. Now, remember, these disciples are men who left their vocations, their livelihood, in order to follow Jesus. We know specifically that Peter and Andrew and James and John, the scripture teaches us, they left their nets in order to follow Jesus. They walked away from what was probably a fairly lucrative career as fishermen. We know that Matthew left his tax booth. So for these guys, being a disciple was not just something they did a few times a week, it became their vocation. So it's a little strange that Jesus tells them, hey, I want you to go, and I want you to proclaim the kingdom of God, to heal the sick, raise the dead, cast out demons, and I want you to do this without pay. That's what he says in verse 8. I want you to do this without pay. In other words, don't go in and say, I will preach to you, I will heal your sick, I will raise the dead, I will do all of these things, but here's my little, I'm going to open up my guitar case and I'm going to leave it right there. I'll do those things if you put some money in there. He says, no, don't do that. Then you look at the end of verse 10 and he says, the worker deserves his food. The worker deserves what's coming to him. So he says, I don't want you to go in and say, I'll do these things if, but I want you to understand you still deserve to be compensated for what you are about to go and do. Okay, Jesus, we understand. We understand. We're not to ask for money, but we know that we should be, but we may not be. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take along some extra food. We're going to take along some extra money. We're going to take along some extra clothes just in case they don't take care of us. We're going to be prepared. And Jesus says, no. No gold, no silver, no copper, no extra clothes. What? Why would he say that? It's the principle of reliance. He says, I want you to rely on God to provide. Jehovah Jireh is enough. They were to go into the harvest field trusting that the God who sent them would also take care of them. God establishes that principle of the worker is worthy of his food. That is something that God has put in place. He is worthy of his support. So when a rabbi went into a town in those days, one of the things that would happen is that the people would bless him. He didn't go in asking to be blessed, but they would bless him. And in blessing him, they would also receive the blessing. Paul picked up on this principle when he instructed Timothy regarding the financial support, especially of those who led well. He said, let the elders who lead well be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who work hard at preaching and teaching. The laborer is worthy of his wages. I was thinking about that this week as I was mulling over the passage and studying and preparing this message. And I was reminded that in my own ministry, I've tried to practice this. In fact, when we went to First Baptist Church of Louisville, we had several interviews, and I had preached for the committee, and we met, and we're getting ready to finish up, and they said, we want you to come in view of a call. And I said, okay, we sense the Lord leading in this as well, so we will agree to come in view of a call. And so we get up to walk out of the room, and the chairman of the committee turns around and he says, wait a minute, we've not discussed compensation. And I said, no, we haven't. He said, but you just agreed to come in view of a call even though we haven't discussed compensation. I said, yeah. He goes, oh, that's right, though. You know what it is. You know what's in the budget, and I promise you it won't be less than what's in the budget. I said, actually, I've never seen the budget. I asked y'all to send it to me, and you didn't send it to me, but that's okay. I know the size of your church. I know the size of your budget. I know what it should be, and I'm not worried. I trust it'll be adequate. Well, the next day, an EF5 tornado tore through that town, took out about half of the neighborhoods, killed 10 people. So I was scheduled to go and meet with them that next Sunday, and we did meet the staff, got to see the devastation, met with the committee, and they started talking compensation, and they said, we feel like we need to pay you more than what's in the budget. I said, no, you don't. Not after what's just happened in this town. You don't know what the future's going to hold. No. I've tried to practice that in my own ministry through the years. In fact, one time I made the statement, I would do this for free. Melanie had a heart attack. Then I thought, there was a period of time I did do this for free. I preached for 2 years on Wednesday nights at Shades Mountain Baptist Church without pay. That's what I'm called to do. And yet somehow God has always provided. That's the principle of reliance. You say, okay, preacher, but we're not called to vocational ministry. You're called to vocational ministry. We have other vocational ministers on staff, but not all of us are called to vocational ministry. How does this principle apply to us? How does it apply to us as a church? Well, the principle of reliance applies to all of us. When you are living sent to your neighborhood, sent to your school, sent to your family, when you are living sent, God will supply everything that you need. Amen. He'll supply the opportunities. He will supply the opening. He will supply the words. And He will supply the power. And as a church, when we are collectively living sent, God will supply our needs as well. Amen. Rely on Him. Next is the principle of receptivity. This is something that our missionaries practice all of the time, especially when they are in a cross-cultural setting. The principle simply states this: look for someone who is open, a person of peace, if you will. Then allow that person of peace to open doors for you. I think I've told you guys before about my friend Stephen Stallard, who was a church planter in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, New York. He's now a professor at Northern Baptist Seminary in Portland, Oregon. But when he first moved to Crown Heights with his wife and his little girl, he moved into a culture that was very, very different than his. He looks like me. The people in his neighborhood do not look like me. Well, they do kind of now because of gentrification, and you've got other folks moving into the neighborhood as well. But at the time, there were 16 different languages spoken just in Crown Heights. And so he goes in as a white Southern Baptist to plant a church in this very diverse community. He knew no one. He looked like no one. He sounded like no one, even though he was from up north. Still didn't sound like them. So what did he do? He started hanging out in the neighborhood. He ate in all of the restaurants. He went into all of the shops. What was he doing? He was looking for a person of peace. He was looking for a person who, when they said, "What are you doing here?" and he said, "I'm here to plant a church," they would go, "Oh, tell me more about that." He was looking for someone who showed a little bit of receptivity. Maybe they weren't ready to say, "Man, count me in, I'll be there next Sunday." But they were at least open to what he was saying. He would go and prepare his sermons in a coffee shop. So people would see him. "What are you doing?" "Preparing a sermon." "What's that?" "Well, let me tell you about it." Well, one of the persons of peace that he met was a lady named Grace. Melanie and I met Grace for the first time when we went on our first trip to do mission work there in Crown Heights with Stephen. Grace owned a Jamaican restaurant. Oh, man, that stuff was good. It was good. Grace was his person of peace. She opened doors because she was receptive. He would go in. Her place was one of the places he would go eat, and often would sit there through the afternoon working on sermons. By the time we got there, she was already a regular attender at Mosaic Baptist Church. And one of the neatest things was that every time I took a team up there to work in the neighborhood, her restaurant was the place where that was our meeting back point. It's where if you went this way and you had this group go that way and this group go that, we'd come back here at lunch, and then we'd make our plans for the afternoon, and then we meet back here when the day is over. Her place became the central hub for all of the mission work that was taking place. It was incredible. She even hosted a small group there in the evenings. Jesus is telling them when he says, when you go into a town, go into a house and greet them and see if they are a person who is worthy. He's saying, go and find a person of peace. Go and find a Grace. Go and find someone. He says, and when you find them, when they're open and hospitable, stay with them until you leave that town. Now, why would he say stay with them until you leave the town? Well, what if I go and I find this person of peace and they got a nice house, but their mattress is a little lumpy and she can't really cook really well, and so and they don't have satellite cable or anything like that. The internet stinks. But there's this other person, they've shown interest, and man, you should see their house. I'd have my own suite over there, and they cater in food all of the time. He says, no, don't be going looking. He says, when you find a person of peace, you stay there. Don't switch houses, stay where you are. Now, I want to spend just a moment on this idea that Jesus said to them, don't go to the Samaritans and don't go to the Gentiles. Stay only going to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Why would he do that when we know the Great Commission says to go to all the nations? Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. I think a couple of reasons. One is they were going to preach the message that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Only Jews would understand that message. Only Jews would understand what it meant for the kingdom of heaven to be at hand. So he said, go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But I think it was also because there were likely to be among the Jews some who were at least open, some who were at least receptive to what they were doing, because they already had a gospel reference point. They already understood about the kingdom of heaven. They were already looking for the coming of Messiah. They knew about the kingdom. So he says, go to those who are most receptive. Find a house that is receptive. Base your work in that community from there. This morning, some of you have already picked up one of these little packets that are in baskets right next to where the bulletins are. If you haven't gotten one, I encourage you to get at least one before you leave. These are invitation cards. On the front, it says Huffman Baptist Church, and there's a question under it that says, looking for hope? On the back side of it, tells them where they can find hope. Find hope at Huffman. It's alliterated, right? We're preachers. We can't help it. It also has a QR code that takes them to our website. It has the place, it shows where we are on the map and some other information. So why am I asking you to pick up one of these? I'm asking you to do that because I also want you to answer this question. Who do I know who would be most receptive to an invitation to Huffman Baptist Church? And then this card gives you an easy entree. Go to the person, you say, can I invite you to Huffman Baptist Church? God's doing some incredible. Now, if you don't think God's doing incredible things, don't lie. But if you do believe God's doing incredible things, and you do believe they can find hope at Huffman, then use this as an opportunity to say, can I invite you to go and see what God is doing? I'm not asking you at this point to share the gospel with them. We'll get there. But right now, I just want to help us cultivate this culture of inviting. Maybe it's a family member. Maybe it's a former member of the church. In fact, we had someone who showed up a few weeks ago, was getting some work done in the area and just came in and sat down and said that they were a former member and they would like to come back, but they weren't quite sure how. Like, it's easy. You walked in today, you could walk in on a Sunday. But the reality is that there are people who went out from here that they would be embarrassed to try to come back because they're not sure how we would feel about them. Well, if you invite them, you just told them how you feel about it. So it may be a family member. It could be a former member of the church. Goodness knows some of them who went out, and I won't call the name of the church where they went, they're not ashamed to invite you to come to their new church. Maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a former member, maybe it's a friend or a coworker. These just make it easy. Make it easy for you to go to someone who you feel might be receptive and invite them. Let's practice the principle of receptivity. But what if you invite them and they don't come? What if you invite them and they say no? What if you invite them and they are angry that you invited them? I don't think that'll happen. But that brings us to the principle of responsibility. Jesus told the 12 that when someone is not receptive to your message, move on to someone else. And for those who are downright dismissive to the gospel, he said, you know what? That's not your responsibility. It'll be better for Sodom and Gomorrah than it will be for that town that was not even just not receptive, that they were antagonistic toward the gospel. He said it'll be better for Sodom and Gomorrah than it will be for them. See, everything comes down to responsibility. The disciples had the responsibility for doing what Jesus told them to do, for following his instructions. They had gathered and grown. Now it was time to go. Their responsibility? Go and tell. It was the responsibility of the lost sheep of Israel to hear and respond. Remember, we've seen this throughout chapters 8 and 9. Jesus shows up. He does something or says something that causes people to have to decide how they will respond, and they have to make that decision. They are responsible for that decision. Will we follow him or not? Here is the principle of responsibility for us. I will be responsible for how I responded to Jesus' invitations in my life. So will you. I will be responsible for how I shepherded my influence with the people God put in my path. So will you. I will be responsible for how I shepherded my family toward the heart of God. So will you. And as an added responsibility, I will be responsible for how I shepherded the Lord's church that he entrusted to my pastoral care. These disciples had been to seminary. They had all of the seminary classes that they needed. They had sat at the feet of Jesus. He had demonstrated, he said, I'm not just going to teach you things, I'm going to show you things. He showed them what ministry looked like. Now it was time to go into the lab for some real life experience. I remember when I took 10th grade biology. I enjoyed biology. The first semester, we were only in the textbook. I liked it. But I knew that in the second semester, things were going to get real. We were going to cut something open. I was not looking forward to that. Mainly because the smell. It was awful. And I don't do well with smells. But you don't learn biology only from a textbook. You got to get in the lab. Too many Christians are like the biology student who doesn't want to get in the lab. We are content to sit and to soak in the classroom. But the disciple is someone who doesn't sit and soak only. A disciple is someone who is also sent. Someone who gathers, someone who grows, someone who goes to make Jesus known across the street and around the world. We are called to live as those who are sent. We are sent. The question is, will we go? Father, I want to thank you today for a church that has demonstrated over and over and over again that we will go. We will be sent. But Father, I also know that there's more to learn. There's more to share. There's more for us to do in the field of your harvest. And so, God, this morning I pray once again to the Lord of the harvest that you would send forth laborers into your harvest field. And I pray, Father, that we would each say, with the prophet Isaiah, "Here I am. send me.